Have you ever stepped into the woods expecting a peaceful escape only to feel something lurking in the shadows? That chilling sensation, as if invisible eyes are fixed on you, making every muscle tense. The kind of feeling that clings to you long after the sun dips below the horizon. Camping, once a serene retreat, can turn sinister when the forest grows unnervingly still, and the shadows stretch out longer than they should. As the fire crackles and the wind whispers through the trees, you can't help but wonder, are you truly alone? Sometimes that eerie silence is just the calm before the storm. Tonight, I'm going to share three spine-chilling true camping stories that will make you think twice before ever stepping into the wild again. These are real experiences, stories of terror that will leave you questioning what's lurking in the dark. So sit tight, because after hearing these, you'll never look at the woods the same way again. 1. The hiker who vanished. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend hike. The kind of escape where you could forget about the world, unwind, and reconnect with nature. Lena, an experienced hiker, had done this trail dozens of times. She knew the woods like the back of her hand. But that day, something felt different. The air was unusually still, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Lena had set off early in the morning with her usual gear, a backpack packed with supplies, a map, a compass, and a couple of energy bars. The trail was known for its beauty, majestic trees, cascading waterfalls, and birds singing sweet melodies from the treetops. But as she walked deeper into the forest, the quiet began to feel unsettling. No birds, no rustling in the bushes, just silence. Around noon, Lena reached a clearing that she'd always found serene. It was a spot where she would usually sit for a few minutes, take in the view, and refuel with a quick snack. But that day, she felt a strange compulsion to keep going. Something in her gut told her to move, to not stop. As she hiked, the path grew narrower and the trees thicker. She glanced at her watch. Time was slipping away, but it wasn't unusual for her to lose track of time when she was out here, alone in her element. But soon, Lena began to notice something odd. She'd been following the same trail markers for hours, but now they seemed to be off. The familiar landmarks weren't where they should be, and she found herself walking in circles. She stopped and pulled out her map, trying to figure out where she was. The trail wasn't supposed to loop back like this. She double-checked her compass. It was working fine, but something didn't add up. A strange unease began to settle in her chest. There was no clear path anymore, no markers, no signs of the familiar trail she'd always followed. Was she lost? It seemed impossible. This was a trail she knew so well. Her heart began to race as she realized that the forest around her looked different. The trees were taller, thicker, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground. It was as if the woods themselves were closing in on her. Lena took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She couldn't panic. It wasn't like her. She decided to head back the way she came. But as she turned, she noticed something. There was someone else in the woods. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe another hiker. But as she squinted, she could make out a figure, standing still, barely moving. The shape was distorted, almost blurry, like it didn't belong. It wasn't a person, not really. The way it stood, unmoving, made Lena's blood run cold. Who could be out here? There was no one else on the trail that day. The figure seemed to watch her, then slowly, too slowly, disappeared into the trees. It wasn't like it walked away. It just melted into the shadows, like it was part of the forest itself. Lena felt her stomach twist in a way she'd never felt before. Was it a hallucination? She started walking faster, her steps becoming more urgent. The woods around her seemed to close in tighter, the air thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. She checked her phone, no signal. By now, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, and Lena knew she needed to get out before nightfall. But the more she walked, the more she felt as though the woods were shifting around her. The path never seemed to end. It wasn't until the sun had almost completely disappeared that Lena realized she was no longer alone. The feeling of being watched had become unmistakable. Every crack of a twig, every rustle in the leaves felt like it was coming from right behind her. But when she spun around, no one was there. With nightfall now upon her, Lena made one final attempt to find her way back. But the forest, which had once felt so familiar, now seemed alien. The trees stretched higher, their shadows darker. Her heart raced, and her breathing became shallow. Then, just when she thought she saw the outline of a trail in the distance, Lena stumbled over something cold, hard, and unnaturally smooth. She shone her flashlight down, expecting to see a rock, but instead it was a human bone. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. Someone had been here before, someone who had never made it out. The next morning, search teams scoured the area, but Lena was never found. Her backpack, her gear, everything was left behind, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The only thing they discovered was the strange, faint trail of footprints that led to nowhere, as if Lena had followed something, or someone, into the unknown. What happened to her? Was it the figure in the woods, or did the forest itself claim her as its own? We may never know, but one thing is for sure. Lena is just one of many who've disappeared in these very woods, lost to the darkness, forever. 2. The Whispering Shadows. Tom and his best friend Kyle had always dreamed of an epic camping trip, just the two of them in the wilderness, far from the distractions of city life. They had planned this trip for months, looking forward to the quiet nights under the stars, the smell of pine and campfires, the shared stories and laughter. Neither of them had any idea that this trip would change their lives forever, or that the woods they were heading into were hiding secrets too dark to comprehend. They arrived at the trailhead around mid-afternoon, eager to begin their adventure. The woods were dense, the towering trees casting long shadows over the path. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The air was still, without even a whisper of wind to rustle the leaves. They shrugged it off as just another sign of being deep in nature. They set up camp near a small creek, the sound of the flowing water soothing in the otherwise still air. After dinner, they sat around the campfire, enjoying the warmth as the night crept in. But as the fire crackled and popped, something felt off. The woods seemed too quiet. Even the usual sounds of wildlife, crickets, frogs, rustling animals, were missing. Tom and Kyle exchanged glances. "It's just the time of year, maybe," Kyle said, though there was a nervous edge to his voice. They tried to shake it off and continued their conversation, but soon, an eerie silence settled over the campsite. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the trees around them. And then they heard it, just barely above the crackling of the fire. A whisper. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. A voice, just beyond the trees, speaking in a language neither of them understood. They froze, eyes wide, ears straining to catch another sound. It came again, this time clearer, but still unintelligible. The whispers were soft, almost melodic, yet unnerving, as though they were beckoning someone into the woods. "Did you hear that?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kyle nodded, his face pale. "What is that?" "It doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard before." For a moment, they both just stared into the darkness beyond their campfire, waiting. The whispers grew louder, and a chill ran through Tom's spine. It wasn't the kind of whisper that belonged to any living person. This felt wrong. It was as if something, or someone, was hiding just out of sight, watching them. "Let's go check it out," Kyle said, trying to mask the shakiness in his voice. "Probably just some weird animal or, I don't know, maybe a person lost in the woods." But Tom wasn't convinced. No way. "I don't think that's an animal. And there's nobody else out here, Kyle. We're the only ones at the campsite." Despite his growing anxiety, they decided to investigate. They grabbed their flashlights and slowly began to move toward the source of the sound, keeping their steps cautious and quiet. As they pushed past thick bushes and trees, the whispers seemed to move with them, drawing closer and closer, but still remaining just out of reach. And then they saw it. A shape in the distance. It was a figure, standing motionless in the darkness, tall, gaunt, its form barely distinguishable in the dim light of their flashlights. The whispering grew louder, more intense, and now, it was clear, it was coming from the figure itself. But as they took a step closer, the figure didn't move. In fact, it seemed to be frozen in place, its back turned to them. No sound, no movement, just the whispering that seemed to emanate from the very air around it. "Kyle, let's go back," Tom whispered, his voice trembling. His heart was racing, and his instincts were screaming at him to get away from this thing. But Kyle, almost in a trance, stepped forward. No, I need to know what this is. I need to see it. Before Tom could stop him, Kyle took another step forward, his hand outstretched as if to touch the figure. That's when it happened. The figure turned. It was not a person. It couldn't be. Its face was nothing, just a blank, smooth surface, like a mirror with no reflection. The eyes were empty, dark voids, staring directly at Kyle. The whispering stopped. Kyle froze, his hand now inches from the figure, his breath caught in his throat. And then it spoke. The voice was deep, distorted, like something ancient that had been buried for centuries. Why are you here? The voice wasn't coming from the figure's mouth. It was coming from everywhere. The ground, the trees, the very air around them seemed to hum with the voice's power. Tom grabbed Kyle's arm, pulling him back with all his strength. They ran, not looking back, the eerie whispers now rising in volume behind them, as if the forest itself was chasing them. They didn't stop running until they reached the campsite. Tom's chest was heaving, his mind racing. He wanted to tell himself it was just an animal, a trick of the wind, maybe even a hallucination, but he couldn't shape the image of that thing, the faceless figure, its empty eyes burning into his soul. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear. They couldn't sleep. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made their blood run cold. The whispers never stopped, but they were muffled, as if they were coming from far away now. The fire was dying down, and Tom knew they couldn't stay there. The next morning, they packed up in a hurry, too terrified to even consider staying for another night. As they walked back to their car, the sun had risen, but the woods still felt heavy, oppressive. They didn't speak much on the way back. Neither of them knew how to explain what they had experienced, and neither of them wanted to talk about it, not yet. As they left the forest behind, something strange happened. Tom looked back, and for a brief moment, he swore he saw something standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the tree line. A figure, faceless, watching them leave. He didn't say anything to Kyle. They didn't need to talk about it. They both knew that what they had seen in those woods was no normal creature, no animal or person. It was something far older, far darker. And whatever it wasn't done with them yet. 3. The Whispering Trees. It was meant to be a bonding trip, a weekend getaway for 4 friends from college who hadn't seen each other in years. The plan was simple. Camp out in the woods, tell stories, and enjoy a few days of fresh air away from their busy lives. The forest they chose was deep in the heart of a state park known for its beauty, quiet trails, and the occasional report of eerie events. It was a place that sounded perfect for a quiet, peaceful escape. But for Alex, it would be his last trip into the woods. Alex and his friends, Tara, Matt, and Sarah, arrived at the trailhead late in the afternoon. The forest was peaceful, the kind of serene quiet that only a secluded place could offer. They set up camp near a small stream, the gentle babbling of water adding to the tranquility. The air was crisp, cool enough to make their breath visible as the sun began to dip behind the horizon. They laughed, set up their tents, and prepared a campfire, enjoying each other's company. But as the fire crackled and the stars appeared overhead, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, making the woods feel alive, almost sentient. They all felt it, that subtle sense of unease, the kind of feeling you get when something isn't quite right, but you can't place your finger on it. "I'm not sure about this place," Tara said, her voice slightly trembling as she stared into the shadows of the trees. "There's something off about it." "Oh, come on," Matt laughed. "You're just spooked. It's just a forest. Nothing to be afraid of." But Sarah, usually the brave one, wasn't laughing. She stared into the woods, her face pale. "I don't know. I keep hearing things, like whispers, just beyond the trees." Alex shrugged it off, attempting to lighten the mood. "It's probably just the wind. Forests do that. They play tricks on your mind." They all agreed to sit by the fire, chatting and drinking, trying to push away the strange feeling that had begun to settle over them. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder. At first, they were soft, barely audible, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. But then they became distinct, clear words that no one could quite understand. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. The others fell silent, straining their ears. At first, it was just the wind, rustling the leaves. But then, the whispers again, more distinct this time. The voices seemed to come from all around them, coming from the trees themselves. Tara, Matt, Sarah. The voices murmured, but no one spoke them. It wasn't any of them. It was as if the trees were calling their names. The air grew colder. The fire crackled louder, but it didn't seem to offer the warmth it had before. Alex felt a chill seep into his bones. Something wasn't right. Then, without warning, the whispering stopped. The forest fell silent, but in that silence, they all felt it. The heavy, oppressive presence, as if the woods were watching them. The shadows seemed deeper, more menacing. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was there with them, something ancient and powerful. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. At first, it was barely perceptible, like a low rumble underfoot, but then it intensified. The trees swayed violently, their branches creaking like old bones. Matt looked at Alex, his face pale. What the hell is happening? Before anyone could respond, the sky lit up. A flash of light so bright, it felt like daylight in the middle of the night. And in that moment, they all saw it. Standing at the edge of their campsite was a figure, a shadow, so tall that it seemed to tower above them. It wasn't human. It was made of the same dark wood and leaves as the trees around them, but it was something else, something alive, something ancient. Its eyes glowed with a faint, eerie light, and its limbs stretched like branches, swaying unnaturally in the wind. "Run!" Sarah screamed. They didn't need any more encouragement. They grabbed their things, ran toward the trailhead, not looking back. But the whispering started again, louder than ever, urgent, desperate, almost angry. "You cannot leave." The trees seemed to part for them as they ran, but there was no escape. The shadows closed in behind them, faster than they could run. The ground beneath them trembled, like it was shaking them loose. And then, in the blink of an eye, Alex was gone. He didn't scream. He didn't even make a sound. One moment, he was running with the others, and the next, he had vanished. No trace, no sign of him anywhere. Tara, Matt, and Sarah searched for hours, but the forest had swallowed him whole. They couldn't find his backpack, his flashlight, or any sign that he'd ever been there. By morning, when the authorities arrived, the three of them were huddled at the trailhead, shaking, too scared to speak. Alex was never found. But the story doesn't end there. The next year, the friends returned to the same forest, hoping to find some closure. They knew the risks, but they had to know what happened to Alex. What they didn't expect was the whispers. As they entered the woods, the trees seemed to recognize them, and the voices started again. They weren't calling their names this time. No, this time, the voices were calling Alex's name. The forest has a memory. It never forgets, and as the wind howled through the trees, they realized the truth. Alex hadn't been the first to disappear here, and he wouldn't be the last. As the last of the embers from the campfire flicker out, one thing becomes abundantly clear. There is something deeply unsettling about the woods, something that goes far beyond the ordinary. Each of the stories we've heard tonight is tied by a common thread, a sense of isolation, a loss of control, and an overwhelming presence that cannot be easily explained. Whether it's the eerie whispers of the forest, the strange disappearances, or the chilling sensations that creep in when the sun dips below the horizon, these woods have a way of revealing the darkness within. The first story left us with the chilling thought: who was the person in the shadows? Could it have been a figment of their imagination, or was it something more? Something alive in those woods, something that has seen too much to let anyone walk away unscathed. The second story raises even more questions. What was it that triggered the horrifying events at the campsite? Could it have been an ancient curse, or was it something far more sinister at work? Was the unknown creature responsible for the torment the campers endured, or was it simply a force of nature, something that had existed long before they set foot on that trail? And then there's the final story. The haunting whispers, the figure in the trees, the disappearance of Alex. All of it leaves us to wonder, what is the true nature of the forest? Is it simply a collection of trees and wildlife, or is it something that has been alive for much longer than any of us can fathom? And why does it call to those who wander too deep? One thing we know for sure is that these forests are not like any other. They have a way of drawing you in, making you feel like you're safe, like you're just another visitor passing through. But the moment you let your guard down, the moment you trust it, you become part of the woods. So, as you head into the wilderness yourself, remember this. You may think you're lost in the woods, but what if the woods are lost in you? Whatever you choose to believe, one thing is certain. There are things out there that we can never fully explain. Things that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting wanderer to cross their path. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be the next story.